Selwyn here for WynnStrength.com. This will be part 1 of a 5-part video series detailing how you can build a stronger deadlift. So part 1 of the video I think is probably going to be one of the most important things that you can improve, not just for the deadlifts, but for pretty much every other lift in your arsenal, and that's breathing and bracing. Correct breathing and bracing is at the core of every single one of your lifts, and I think the one thing that I've made the biggest mistake on in the previous years before I started picking up some moderately heavy weights is the lack of mind-muscle connection with my core and how I breathe and how I brace during those heavy lifts. Once I was able to nail that down and really get a handle on how to engage the core and how to properly do these things, that's when I saw my numbers really go up, and the lifts felt easier in a weird way. Once you get that connection down, it's going to be a game changer for how you are able to pick up some weights. So first off, I want to invite you to take a couple of deep breaths in while you're sitting there. Now, what did you notice? Did you notice your shoulders rising and falling, or was your abdomen, or was your belly increasing in size and decreasing in size? I bet that if your shoulders are rising and falling, you're not breathing correctly, and that's just going to be central to how you can start breathing better for heavy lifting. Now, this won't happen overnight. This is something that I kind of have to consciously think of, even now, every now and then, is to breathe into your belly just every day, all the time, every day, as much as you can. I notice that sometimes I'll start, when I'm getting stressed or like anxious, my shoulders you'll start feeling your shoulders rising and falling. And that's when you really need to just have a conscious thought to, I need to breathe into my belly, and over time you notice that you're breathing into your shoulders less and less, and you're breathing into your stomach more and more. And what you're really wanting to do is breathe into the belly, because when you breathe into the belly, you're filling up your diaphragm properly with air, and you're able to actually get in a deeper amount of air. You're able to inhale more oxygen when you breathe into that belly. You notice that I do talk about breathing and bracing in 2 separate parts. That's because breathing is only one part of the picture. When we breathe into that stomach correctly, we build in all that intra-abdominal pressure, and what we want to think of doing when we lift. So we talked about how to do it in everyday life, and now what that's going to transfer over to is some practice when we want to lift, because we want to breathe into that belly. You want to think of filling in your stomach with air, and then after that you want to think of filling in your obliques and lower back with air. And that's a weird thing to think about, but when you practice it, when you look in the mirror, you want to see your obliques kind of expand out. And when you're able to master that, just stand in front of the mirror next time you have a shower and envision your sides coming in and out. And why you want to do that is because that way you're actually filling in that entire abdominal cavity with air. It's not enough to just simply fill the front up with air. We want to try and fill as much of that space as possible. And this is where an analogy comes in for the soda can. You notice an empty can can be crushed pretty easily. You can just smash it however you want. But once you fill that can with liquid and seal it, it becomes pretty difficult to crush. You can support a lot more weight. Now, when you feel the sides of that can, you notice that it comes in a little bit, but give that can a good old shake, and you'll notice that the side walls become harder and harder to press in as that pressure is building on the inside, trying to force its way out. And that's kind of what we want to do with our abdominal section, our midsection, is we want to intake as much air as possible, and by increasing the amount of pressure inside the belly, it's pushing out against our skin and all the other musculature around us, obviously. But that creates this nice rigid section that's harder to crush than if it was an empty. Like if you just exhaled all of your air and kind of that crumpled look, you're not going to be able to support as much weight as if you took in that big belly breath and really braced down on it. And that's where we come into bracing. That's the second part of the puzzle. we want to be able to close our glottis, so close your throat. You don't want to hold the breath in your face or your cheeks, just because it's not as efficient. You should be able to hold all of your breath in your throat. You shouldn't have to hold it into your mouth, because that's going to have a potentially leak. Your lips are going to be weaker than your throat or your glottis is, because you're able to hold more pressure in here than you are up here. And the other thing you want to think about is bracing down that core. And just like we wanted to breathe into our obliques, we want to think about flexing as much as possible, not just our front abs, but also our obliques and our lower back, and have that whole 360 degrees bracing pressure that we want to think about. And there's two ways to go about this. You can either think of expanding out as much as possible. So you want to, again, like you breathe into your obliques, and so your obliques shoot out to the side. You want to flex your obliques so that they expand out as well. And you're able to see that kind of pop out a little bit. The other one is you want to brace as if you're about to get punched in the stomach or punched in the sides. And that's bearing down and engaging the core as much as possible. What's going to help this is obviously direct core movements everywhere else in exercise. So you want to practice things like powerlift presses, ab wheel rollouts, some of those anti-rotation or anti-movement movements where you're really trying to stop the core from moving when the rest of you is moving, which is what we're doing when we're squatting, deadlifting, bench pressing, overhead pressing. We're moving the rest of the body, but we're really wanting that core to stay as rigid and tight as possible. Because whenever we move under load, if there is any movement in this midsection, that's going to represent a power leak. And the more power leaks you have in a chain, the more inefficient that chain is, and the less you're able to lift a heavy weight. Literally think of trying to push something with a chain. If you're pushing the chain, those weak links are going to just bunch up. You're not going to actually be able to push that load you're trying to push. But if you try and push something with a pole or a barbell, obviously when you push here, it's going to push direct. There's going to be a direct correlation between pushing here and the force exerted there. And that's how you want to think about that midsection. You want to have no power leaks. You want that to be as tight and as rigid as possible. And by bracing, that's going to help you do that. So the final part of the puzzle is not exhaling during your lift. Valsalva maneuver is pretty common amongst a lot of powerlifters and anyone that's kind of lifted a heavy weight. Even yourself, you probably find if you had to strain to move something, you would have tensed down and held your breath while you move that out. Just that's because of, again, that pressure leak, where if you exhaled while you were doing that, you're going to lose a lot of that pressure, much like when you open that soda can up, it's going to release all that pressure inside. So you want to maintain that breath when you're deadlifting. I like to take my deep breath at the top of the deadlift, and then not exhale till that barbell is finished, until I finish that rep. So I will set up, get my deep breath set up, get everything set up, and then bend down, and as quickly as possible I'll come back up and pick that weight up. So I'm not spending any time bent over. I'm spending a lot less time trying to pick that weight up. I should know, this is where that practice comes in. I already know where to grip the bar, how to grip the bar, how to bend down and pick it up, and drive as much tension as I can at the bottom of that lift, so that I really spend as little amount of time as possible. And I'll talk about that in video number 2, where I discuss technique. So be sure to check that out and subscribe to the playlist that I'll throw up here, so you can stay tuned and stay up to date and get the second out of the 5 tips. But with regards to the breath, it's going to take some time to get used to, just because it's harder to get as much breath as you can bent over as you can standing up. I mean, do a little experiment yourself, see how you can increase that breath either bent over or standing up. I almost guarantee you that you should be able to get a deeper breath when you're in that upright standing position, just because you have more space there. And by doing that, we're actually compressing that gas even more, compressing that pressure, so that you're almost like a spring ready to explode out when you pick that bar up. There's all that built up tension in the body that you just want to get up. You're just wanting to fire up and pick that weight up. And I can't talk about breathing and bracing without introducing the concept of the lifting belt. I think a lifting belt is pretty important for lifting heavy weights. I think you can kind of use it whenever you want. Stay tuned later for a series where I talk just about the lifting belt. But in this video, I'll briefly mention it, that the lifting belt isn't there to support your back. It's there to give you something to press out against. So think of the lifting belt as giving you another layer around that can to build up more pressure. So once you get a handle on breathing and bracing, it's gonna pay dividends in pretty much every single one of your lifts. When you're moving a weight, you want to have as few power leaks as possible in the body. Less movement is better when you don't need it to be there. So when your core and midsection don't move, that's going to be great for any time you're lifting a heavy weight. Stay tuned for the second video where I talk about technique and how the deadlift technique might be something that's holding you back. Be sure to subscribe to the playlist that I'll link right here. That way you can stay up to date. Be sure to subscribe to the video so you don't miss out when I upload that video next week. This has been Stellan from Wynn Strength, and remember, a better life through strength.